oh, Africans have never gone to the moon, blah, blah, blah. But like some African country or some black person just said, oh, Africans are better. We'll fly to the sun. We'll be the first people on the sun. And then at some point, like the person that was listening was like, yo, that's bullshit. You can't fly to the sun. It's like 1,000,000 degrees hot. And those guys were like, well, yeah, now that's where our genius comes in. We'll fly at night.
The royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
Welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man whose sickness for the thickness prevents him from skinny dipping. He is also a man who may include jumping to conclusions to his form of cardio. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. And I am back on whatever app you're using to listen to, or should I say, I am on this podcast, at least this episode today, to talk about switch-ups, because goodness my, I feel like sometimes people just have this thing where, like, you expect it to be one thing, but then all of a sudden it's not, or, you are thinking about it in one way, and then all of a sudden it's not. And that is definitely something that I do want to get into. And at least I can be sure that in some way, shape, or form, it's not exactly what some people might be thinking. And I do intend on getting to why and how it isn't that in a little bit. Although, considering that I have been doing this for about a minute and you are listening to this episode, I hope you listen all the way till the end. And I hope you do enjoy the voice that you're listening to, as well as the content. And should you like it, should you not like it, should you want to give feedback, or should you want to suggest a topic that I can discuss, then the social media handles are usually in the description below. I would be more than happy to check out what it is that you want me to have a look into and handle it accordingly. Now, I should probably be getting to the main topic of this episode, because there is something interesting about children and switching up and people in relationships. And I would love to get into it because it does present some particularly interesting questions that I think we as people need to ask ourselves. Although before I can get to any of that, I first want to discuss some things that I find a little bit odd. Some things that I find out on the internet, and just courtesy of me busy looking for content, can sometimes be particularly interesting information. And oddly enough, like, it might not be relationship content, but it's just something that I find to be particularly interesting information. And it can range from dumb shit like, I don't know, the fact that cows supposedly have best friends and they get stressed when they're separated, which is actually something that I did read up on, and apparently it's like a thing. Like, cows actually do have best friends. And honestly, like, I find it a little bit hard to believe. Because, like, women can call men dogs, and like, it's supposed to be like a derogatory thing. Then suddenly you realize that a dog is a man's best friend, and it doesn't seem all that bad. But I've never heard someone insulting someone else and calling them a cow. Like, you think about it, whenever people are talking about a cow, it's usually to extract some level of profit. It's not like an insult as like, oh, your best friend is such a cow because like, he's been milking you dry or some shit, or something, this, that, and the other. Like, normally, like, I'd expect like a good trait to be used as an insult to some degree. Like, when you're calling a woman female, because maybe, just maybe, they might wish that they had a dick. Although, with all of that said, I did find it particularly interesting that people would actually go to like the lengths of finding out that like cows have best friends, because like they were monitoring stuff like heart rate and just how visibly flustered, or should I say visibly irritated or just like stressed they were. But the thing that I found even more interesting is the fact that the UK government is set to approve a major research experiment to quote unquote, and I kid you the hell not, this is actually a thing, dim sunlight. And all of this is in aim to like fight global warming. Like, and apparently they were supposed to have approved it within a couple of weeks of the time when I got this story, which was sometime in April, but like they hadn't done it yet. And I don't know, maybe it's just a me thing, but doesn't this remind you of some joke that some people said back in the day? I don't know if it was like a blonde bimbo or some shit, or like some Africans that were joking about this, because there's always this joke about, oh, Africans have never gone to the moon, blah, blah, blah. But like some African country or some black person just said, oh, Africans are better. We'll fly to the sun. We'll be the first people on the sun. And then at some point, like the person that was listening was like, yo, that's bullshit. You can't fly to the sun. It's like 1,000,000 degrees hot. And those guys were like, well, yeah, now that's where our genius comes in. We'll fly at night. When you kind of think about it, like the whole idea of dimming sunlight does actually seem very reminiscent of that. But let me just read the full story so that I can get into my thoughts on it beyond just, the fact that it sounds particularly dumb. So the story says, and I quote, "The UK government is set to approve a major research effort exploring whether dimming the sun could help fight climate change, with over $66 million earmarked for experiments and analysis." Overseen by the Advanced Research and Invention Agency, or ARIA, the initiative will focus on controversial geoengineering techniques, including spraying aerosolized particles into the stratosphere to reflect sunlight and potentially cool the planet. Scientists point to natural examples such as volcanic eruptions that have caused temporary global cooling, but warn that deliberate interventions could trigger unintended and possibly catastrophic disruptions to weather patterns. Other methods under study include marine cloud brightening, using sea salt to make the clouds more reflective, and thinning cirrus clouds which trap heat. All options remain contentious, with critics arguing that geoengineering could undermine efforts to reduce carbon emissions at their source. ARIA, inspired by America's DARPA agency, has over $1 billion to spend over 4 years on high-risk, high-reward research. Led by Professor Mark Symes, the new climate program could involve small outdoor experiments. The agency also suggested that insights gained could eventually support efforts to terraform other planets. End quote. And honestly, this is wild though. Like, they want to start spraying some shit into the atmosphere to reflect sunlight. Like, that kind of goes beyond my original thought, because honestly, like when I heard of the idea of quote-unquote dimming sunlight, I was wondering if these guys were just going to try and cover like their section of the planet or the entire globe in like, I don't know, tinted glass or some shit, and then make sure that it's like perforated so that like the sunlight can seep through and the gases can seep out or some shit like that, because you could probably have both happening at the same time. But honestly, like spraying aerosol, like I feel like this is like the underpinnings of creating a global catastrophe, all in the name of climate change. Because like imagine what it would do to people if, for example, like they managed to actually make it work on one end, but also the fact that they could probably be releasing harmful toxins into the air. Like, I feel like the people that can do something about climate change are doing everything but the actual things that they were supposed to do, which is instead of giving people something that they refer to as carbon credits, which is almost like, I don't know, climate change cryptocurrency for organizations or some shit. If they actually focused on doing stuff like planting more trees, making the ocean a little bit nicer to, like sea life to actually live in, by like reducing on pollution and shit, and actually clamping down on big industries and factories that may be producing like proper greenhouse gases and shit, maybe, just maybe, we may not need to dim the sunlight. Maybe, just maybe we might actually be able to save the planet by not trying to kill it first, But then again, that's just me, and maybe I'm just complaining because I don't have any carbon credits to sell, because apparently they are a very lucrative thing. But either way, I am going to leave it at that and move it on to our main topic of this episode. Now, not too long ago, I stumbled across a particularly interesting Instagram video which had quite a bit of a switch up at some point, but it was actually based off of the idea of whether you would be comfortable with the idea of dating someone and wanting to have a kid, or at least having a kid with the same qualities as the person that you're dating and potentially having kids with. And what it ended up being stitched into was a different question, which took things even further than what the original question was. And I found both of them to be so particularly interesting because it does actually force us to rethink how we date and why we date certain people, or at least why we should think of dating certain people. Now I am going to let the clip play, then I can put my thoughts on it. So without further ado,
if you had a son with this man, the guy that you're dating, if you had a son with him and he turned out just like him, would you be proud?
Yep. We're going to reverse that. Now, question for all the ladies. Would you let your son date you? You know, knowing your past, knowing your history, everything you've done, would you let your son date you? Yeah.
Okay. Particularly interesting questions that have been asked there. And I do intend on handling both of them because both of them were just that interesting that I didn't really feel like I should gloss over one and gloss over the other, or gloss over both, because both of these questions are very, very important ones for people that, especially the ones that want to have kids, but essentially just the idea of dating someone and thinking beyond just yourself, I think, is something that people often ignore but can sometimes be very important for us. Now, I'm gonna handle both of those questions in the order that they came. So the first question of the person that you're dating right now, would you be happy if you had a kid with those same characteristics? And this was something that was being asked to the ladies, and I can actually get why it would make sense to ask it to the ladies and the men, because to a pretty good degree, like whenever it comes to especially sons, how the man treats them, how the man raises them, and the kind of values that he instills in them is very important when it comes to a child's development, more so a boy's development. So when you kind of bring up that question, it is particularly useful and quite important because on one end, it's a question of, would you be comfortable with that person being a father with the current behaviors that they have? On one end, like that's just one question that you can look at. The other one is, do you really think that you are dating someone good, like as far as qualities are concerned? And I think both of those questions are actually quite important because like those are two ways that you can think about it, and maybe there's more, but those are the two that kind of came at me when I was actually thinking about that question originally. And the thought of, would you be comfortable if you had a son that behaved the same way your partner does? Like, I think that would be something that I'd find to be quite interesting because now it's a question of, okay, the kind of partner that you have, are they a good enough partner that they would be a great father figure? Because there's a chance, and this happens a lot, there's a lot of instances actually where you find that a babe gets to have a kid with a guy that is a shit father figure, and then they complain about the father being a shit father figure. Yet they openly and they were perfectly okay having a kid or even kids with said father figure or said father. Even though they're a shit father figure, even though they probably would not have made for a great dad, they are still having kids with this person. And it is something that you would probably, or you probably should think about if you're a babe, whenever it comes to like having a long-term relationship with a certain person. You know, the dick might be great and everything, but would you want to have a son with the same exact qualities as that person? Now, it can also be the same thing when it comes to women, all right? Because if you had a daughter, and like, let's say this is from a man's perspective, not a woman's, like I was discussing the previous one, but like if my wife had a daughter and my daughter was to take up the same qualities as my wife, or you know, my baby mama or my girlfriend, whatever it is that the babe will be, would I be happy with that? And I think that is something that you can think about as a guy, although most guys don't ever really think that far or give it that much empathy, if I can think of it like that. It's more of, you know, I just don't want my kid to be a hoe, and I think that is perfectly okay. The other bits, you find that most guys can kind of gloss over it, but you just don't want them to be like a bad example in society and someone that can fuck up your reputation as a person. Although still within that, it also does kind of create a situation where even though a woman was talking about having a daughter, it can still affect that same daughter in a particularly similar way, because the Oedipus complex and shit. Much as I know that there's people that don't entirely believe in its validity, I see things that are particularly similar to it, so I don't usually refute it. So you think about it, more often than not, girls will be particularly close to their dads, just the same way you'll find that boys will be close to their moms and so on and so forth. So you find that as per the Oedipus complex, because the first person that a baby is attracted to is the parent or a parental figure, because they'll be spending a lot of time with said person, you find that they will start to pick up traits, or they will want traits that emulate that, because that works as the baseline. So on one end, you could say that, okay, they may end up with the qualities of your girlfriend, your wife, your baby mama, but the kind of person that they'll be looking for is someone that carries the baseline qualities that you have as a father. So essentially, it's a question of, do you think this person, or you in this case, if you are seeing yourself as a man in all this, would function as a good potential figure, or at least as a good baseline for potential dates? If your daughter said that they are getting out into the dating market, or if your daughter was to go out into the dating market like 20 plus years after they're born, would you be proud of them wanting to look for someone with the same qualities as you? Like, I think that's a good sort of way to kind of think of yourself as a man, and whether you are a good example to potential kids or to kids that you already have. Because how you behave, how you act as a parent is something that does carry quite a lot of weight. And some of your past behaviors, because people like to talk about how karma is a bitch and what goes around comes back around, can sometimes end up impacting people in the near future. The whole story of the sins of the father become the sins of the son. So it is something to definitely think about. Then now, the second question that was asked, which was basically the Uno reverse, or some version of it, that the dude brought in, which was, would you be comfortable with your child of the opposite sex from you dating someone of your sex with your same qualities? And that is the spanner in the works that a lot of people never usually think about. But some guys that usually like to think about, the idea of whether they would be comfortable or happy having daughters or sons if karma was to be a bitch and give the same treatment that they gave to other people, but now to their kid. Alright? Because you think about it, like, if you're a guy, haven't you ever heard a bunch of dudes just sitting around chilling, busy talking about random shit like banging babes here and there? And then at some point, some guys will start talking about how they would never want to have a daughter, or they've never wanted to have daughters because, of the kind of shit that they do to babes out here, and how, they wouldn't want their own kid to be doing the same thing. Like, okay, maybe it's just a me thing. Maybe it's some of the people that I've interacted with, in the past years. But I feel like this is something that guys used to say back in the day, where they didn't want to have a daughter because they've already seen how babes can be a little bit whorish out here, and they wouldn't want, or at least they wouldn't be comfortable with their own kid doing the same exact thing, even though they themselves are beneficiaries of, whatever whorish behavior they seem to be speaking against. And it is something that I guess more guys have paid attention to than women, because I have listened to instances where women will talk about how they don't mind, like, let's say for example, and I don't mean this to say that it's like bad or anything. If it's your choice, you do whatever the hell it is you want in your bedroom. The LGBT, all right, you will find that women are like, oh, there's nothing wrong with being gay, oh, being gay is perfectly okay, blah blah blah. But you bring up the idea of them having a kid who is gay, and you literally watch some of their faces change, and they're like, no, I wouldn't want to have a gay son. And you're like, then why the fuck are you so comfortable with people being gay out here, yet you wouldn't want to have a gay son? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that people should have anything against gay people, like, just don't get me wrong. But sometimes you can sense a little bit of hypocrisy when it comes to a situation like that, because you wouldn't want to have a gay kid, but you're perfectly okay with other people's kids being gay, provided that it's not yours and they're like your friends or some shit. Like, doesn't that seem a little bit disingenuous? Like, would you want your child, your cousin, your brother to date some of your friends? Like, that's another way to kind of look at things. Okay, the friends thing is probably a bit of a stretch, but it's one of the many ways that people try and bring those comparisons where they're like, do you know the person that you are? Do you know the person that you are with? And are you particularly comfortable with them? You know, are you the kind of person that you would be comfortable with someone else dating because they've probably bagged someone good, or they found someone that is genuinely caring or amazing? Or, you know, are they settling for some damaged bit of goods that has probably been treating people like shit for most of their lives? Like, that's definitely a question that I think more and more people need to ask, because when it comes down to it, people talk about self-love and how you should love yourself, but have you ever tried to push that question of, would I date myself, and why shouldn't I? Why wouldn't I date myself? Because the moment you start asking yourself that question, now it's like, oh, it's not just about whatever benefits I can gain for myself or during this period in time, you know, just for me. Like, there's other repercussions that could come from this. If karma decides to be a bitch when it comes to your life and some of the shit you've done to people, would I be okay with that karma being passed on to my kids? Like, that's one way that you can kind of think about it. And when it comes down to it, I think more and more people should think about it in the sense of, would I be comfortable with my kids dating someone or being with someone who had these particular qualities? Just in the same way, I would also say, like, maybe you should also think about, you know, if I had a kid of the opposite sex, would I be comfortable with them dating someone who had the same exact qualities or went through the same exact experiences as I have? Because if that's the case, like, if you're not comfortable with it, then maybe this is your time to think about whether you should make a change. If you are comfortable with it, maybe you would probably be like, okay, I can understand why, and I'm perfectly okay with it. But if you're not comfortable, maybe you should ask yourself why, you know? Maybe you expecting or hoping better for whatever potential kids you have might be the thing that puts you on a much better path as far as being a particularly good partner or just a good person in general. Which kind of brings me to the conclusion of all of this. When it comes down to it, you should probably be the person that you want to date. I think that's a very good rule of thumb. Be the person that you would want to date. Because if anything, you find that a lot of times similar people will attract very similar people of the same exact kind. If not, then it's finding opposites because of the whole opposites attract thing. And usually the hope is that you don't get an opposite with someone who is just particularly negative or just bad for you. So essentially, still, you know, because the hope is that you're going to find someone similar, be the person that you'd want to date. All right. If not for you, if not for yourself, then maybe, just maybe, for your children, whether they are potential or they are existing, sake. If it's for the children's sake, you know, whether potential or they already exist, just do it for them. Because at the end of the day, you may not have too much of an issue. You may be comfortable. Maybe you're so in love with a person that you are willing to take whatever BS they feed you. Yes, maybe you might be willing to take all of that, but if you end up having kids with this person, are you sure that they would make for a good baseline as far as potential dating preferences are concerned? Although, then again, maybe I have zero understanding on this and maybe I'm asking all the wrong questions. Either way, I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On IG, it is at the Breaktime_podcast. On Facebook, it is at the Breaktime Podcast. On X, it is at Bagaka the D. And on Bluesky, it is at the breaktimepod.bsky.social. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end, and I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.